Okay, so looking at the module 2 items here, if we go through and we start just looking at this first part, right, the first 6 numbers in the pattern are listed below, and the pattern continues. So which expression could be used to determine the 100th number? They're not asking for the 100th number. But as I go through here, if you remember as we did our start and roll from before, we were always looking to see what was our rate of change. And what we are doing here, our rule was to basically add 0.8. And if you remember, that means our rule is also our slope. So when I go through and I look at my answer choices here, the only thing that has a positive 0.8 involved with it is option C. So option C is our answer. When we look at number 2 here, we have the table below lists all the ordered pairs. And I want to point out there, they bold it so that you know there's nothing else here besides these points. So if we have a list of points, remember we're going to need a list or a set for our domain and our range. So our domain is our x's, and it is just the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 5. So it is option B. Okay, looking at question 3. We have this local race where we have a prize for first place is $250 plus an additional $5 for every person who registers for the race. And so we have a lot of information here, and we have this equation here, and it says which statement about the prize for first place is true. So that means we have to look at all 4 answer choices. So if we go through and we start thinking about what makes sense for this, the prize for first place will always be a multiple of 50. Well, if there's only one X, right? If there's only one person who registers for the race, well, 5 times 1 plus 5, that would give me 255, and that's not a multiple of 50. So I know it's not going to be A. If we go through and say the prize for first place is $325 if 75 people register for the race, well, again, I'm going to go through and I want to put 75 in for my X and do the math and see if it equals 325, and that did not work out. C and D, if we stop and we go through and we think about for C and D, we might actually have to do a little bit of math with this guy. So for C, I went through and said, well, okay, if there's 50 people registered, right, X equals 50 here, that means I'd have $500. If X is 25, that means it's 375. And that is not a twice as much relationship. So it's not going to be C. And I'm going to double check D here to make sure that's right before I choose it. And again, if I check this guy here and I get X equals 100, that means it's a $750 prize. And again, if the X is 25, then that's a $375 prize, which is twice as much. So there's your proof that D works. This question is as easy as going through and looking at this problem. You could do a couple things. If standard form weirded you out a little bit, remember you could always solve for y to get it in intercept form. So if I just subtract 3x from both sides, I get y equals 8 minus 3x. So that means I have a start of 8. So A is okay, B is wrong, C is okay, D is okay. And then I need a negative slope for that minus 3x. So again, now I can eliminate C because that's a positive slope. And comparing the differences between A and D, the slopes are different. And in this case, this has a slope of basically 1/3, where this has that slope of 3/1, or negatives on those guys. And that's why D is your best answer on this. Okay, we've got this situation about Paul painting houses where he has a fixed amount to cover his expenses, but he also charges them out based on the number of gallons of paint, which is X, that he's going to need. So when I look at this problem, I can see they've written the equation for us, and I need to figure out what does the 14.5 represent. Remember, X is the number of gallons number of gallons of paints that he needs. So I'm taking the number of gallons times 14.5. So A is not the number of gallons of paint. Remember, that's what X is. And so if I look at B is the charge for each gallon of paint Paul will need. That sounds like it's gonna make sense. And if I go through and look at the other answers, C is the number of, C represents the number of hours it take to complete the paint job. That has nothing to do with it. And D, the fixed amount charged for using a paint sprayer and buying brushes. Well, the fixed amount means it doesn't get multiplied, and the fixed amount there is the 80. So B is our best choice. Looking at number 6 here, again, what is the equation? A line that passes through the points -2, 4 and 6, -2. Well, I mean, we do a couple of things. I could go through and take these points and plug them in, both of those points, into A, B, C, and D and see if the equations work. And if you do that, I caution you to make sure you check all four, because the people who design the test will make these points work, one of these points and work in one equation, but not the other point. So you do want to be very careful if you're testing them. When I looked at this, the first thing I thought was like, well, I'm going to go through and I'll start with calculating the slope. So my slope calculation, I subtracted my y's, 4 minus 2, and I subtracted my x's, negative 2 minus 6. So I'm getting 2 over a negative 8, which is a negative 1/4. At least having my slope eliminates A and B from my answer choices. So at least I'm now down to C or D. And now from here, pick your coordinate. I'll be honest, I went through and I picked 6 and 2 because they were both positive. And I went through and I put 2 in for my y. So if I look at like C here, I put 2 in for my y, and I did negative 0.25 times 6 plus 14. And I plugged that into my calculator to see if it worked. And in C, it didn't. I didn't get 2 equals 2. However, when I checked D, and I put 2 in, and I got, again, that negative 0.25 times 6, and then plus 3.5, I got back 2 equals 2, which then that means D is your correct answer. Here we start with a line being on the coordinate plane, and we just have to pick which statement correctly describes that line. And again, I want to look at all four before I make my answer choice. And so if I start with a slope of negative 2, right, if we look at basically A, B, C, and D, just this first portion, I just need to figure out what the slope is, and that would eliminate 2 of my answer choices. So if I see this guy has a slope of down 1 and right 2, well, it's not going to be A or B. And then when I look at my y-intercept, remember my y-intercept, it's hitting right here. Not this guy here. This is my y-intercept there. It's at negative 2, so between C and D, D is my correct choice. And honestly, you could have probably started with that and saw that the y-intercept was negative 2, and you would have then eliminated C and A, and then you would have just had to decide between B and D. So you could have looked at this a couple different ways. If we check out number 8, they go through and they give us a relationship about the dumbbell weight in pounds and the number of repetitions performed, and a scatter plot that shows Jesse's exercise routine. And then saying, like, based on this scatter plot, which equation would be the best relation, the best line of fit for it. And so when we go through and we look at these, and you start thinking about, well, the line of best fit, right, is going to fall somewhere inside of here and, up in this general direction. And so can we eliminate some answer choices here? So clearly looking at my A, it's not going to hit 30. So it's not going to have a y-intercept of 30. And it's not going to have a y-intercept of 73, right? 73 is going to be like up off the screen. So narrowing it down to basically 50 and 52 for the y-intercept. And so now looking at the slopes, they're both negative. So that doesn't really help between that negative 1.5 and that negative 3.5. And so my next thing would be like, well, let's try to pick some points here to see what would make a reasonable slope. I mean, these numbers are starkly different. So if we just go through and just try to find a couple nice points, they're not gonna be perfect, but like if I just sort of take these two and realize that I'm gonna have a change here of this went down 5 and it went over 5. So down 5 over 5 means I'm gonna have a slope roughly of negative 1. And so when I look at my two answer choices here, that means I'm going to be closer to the B equation than I would the D equation. Okay, so now we go through and we're starting to look at some data analysis problems here. So we have the 10 favorite authors of Amir here, and it represents, these numbers below represent the number of novels. So the question is, what is the interquartile range for these guys? Well, if you remember, IQR is whenever we go through and we take quartile 3 minus quartile 1. So we have to go through and look at these numbers. I know there's 10 of them. So halfway through, the median would be right between these two guys. And the median would be 6. But again, I don't need that. The lower half of data, there's 5 of them. So that means 10 is my quartile 3. And with these 5, 3 is my quartile 1. So if I do 10 minus 3, I would get 7. So that would be answer C. Now we have two bunches of similar bananas. One bunch has 8 bananas and the other bunch has 9 bananas. Here is the weight in grams and the bunch that is 8. So there's 8 numbers there. And so which measurement is most likely the closest to the total weight if I had 9? So the idea here is if I can find the weight of the 8 and then plus the extra banana here, which I need to figure out what the average weight is of a banana, then I'll have the total. So if I go through and total these numbers up, I get that these guys have a sum of 1,048. And so if I divide it by the 8 of them, that means there's roughly 131 grams in each banana. So it means if I take my 1,048 for my 8 bananas and add to it the 9th banana, 131, I would get 1,179, which was answer C. Question 11 gets onto a survey of 9 classmates. Each classmate participated by saying how many days they had eaten fruit and the number of days they exercised. So it was a poll where they had to basically give 2 answers. So every single dot here represents one person. So what is the median number of days that the 9 classmates exercised last week? So if I want to go through and I want to look at the exercised numbers, okay, so I had, if I'm going to put these in numerical order here too, so I'm going to start down here with this guy here. So I had one person say they exercised 1 day. Then right over here, I have one person who exercised 2 days. These 2 dots represent a person who each did 3 days of 2 people did 3 days of exercising. Here's a person who did 4 days. This person did 5 days. I have 2 people with the answer of 6 and 1 person with an answer of 7. And so again, if I'm talking about median, meaning the middle number here, and since there's 9 numbers, that means I'm looking for basically the number exactly in the middle here. So 4 below and 4 above. So 4 would be my median. And lastly, we have this bookstore manager has randomly selected 1 of 5 newly arrived fiction books and then 1 of 4 newly arrived nonfiction books to go into a window display. And what is the probability that the manager will select the shortest of the newly arrived fiction books and the longest of the newly arrived nonfiction books? So let's think about this. I've got 5 new fiction books. Well, only 1 is going to be the shortest. So there's a 1 in 5 chance that you're going to get the shortest book. And then there's only 1 that's going to be the longest of the nonfiction books. So there's a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to get that nonfiction book being the longest. And so when we go through here and we have the probability of these independent events, we will go through and multiply them. So 1 times 1 is 1. 5 times 4 is 20. So it's a 1 in 20th chance that this would happen in the window display. The 1 in 20th chance, if we go through and figure this out as a percentage, is 5%. So that matches up with answer A.